This is Focus with Jack Caudill.
Good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome to this month's edition of Focus. This month we're looking ahead to the opening of the South Dakota Legislature for 2024. Two guests with us to talk about that. Senator Michael Diedrich, he is a Republican from District 34 here in Rapid City, the Assistant Majority Leader in the Senate. Also Representative Gary Cammack from District 29. He is from Union Center, which contains Meade County. He is a Majority Whip in the House of Representatives. I want to mention why we do not have a Democratic representative. We had one lined up. They were confirmed to be here, but a couple of hours before this taping, they messaged us saying that they were ill and unable to be here, could not get a replacement in time. That's why we have a strictly Republican panel. A couple of other things. The 99th session of the South Dakota State Legislature kicks off on Tuesday in Pierre with Governor Kristi Noem's State of the State address. The 38-day session comes to a close on March 7th, with March 25th set aside to consider possible vetoes from the governor. Mike, we're going to start with you. Looking ahead, is there one issue this year that you see that stands out that's going to be kind of the big thing running around Pierre?
I think the county funding, taxation, how do we fund the counties to provide all the services that they have? They're primarily mandated and without good revenue sources. And so there's a summer study committee that reviewed that. They have about 8 bills that are going to address ways to help the county fulfill those obligations and hopefully help reduce or at least mitigate property tax.
Gary, how about you? Is there anything you look at this year that's going to be kind of the big thing in Pierre?
This will be my 12th session in the legislature, and in the end, the majority thing that's talked about is the money. And so it'll be no different this year. We've got some really talented people that are on appropriations, including Mike Diedrich, which those guys, they are the workhorses of the legislature, absolutely. But there'll be some discussion about the pipeline issues, the eminent domain. I'm sure there'll be some of those coming up. There'll be some discussion on the abortion issues, I'm sure. And then beyond that, funding for the counties. I always say I'm a recovering county commissioner. I was county commissioner in Meade County, so I understand very plainly how your budgets just keep getting tighter and tighter, and there's more demand put on county government. And you try to keep those taxes as low as possible, and so there'll be certainly some discussions around that.
Now, talking about taxes, last year's sales tax was a contentious issue in the legislature. The legislature adopted a temporary reduction in the overall state sales tax, and Governor Noem wanted an elimination of the grocery tax. Where's that going to go this year, do you think?
Well, the discussion, as I see it, the discussion this year is going to be whether or not to eliminate the sunset and make it permanent, the tax cut that was passed on last year. And right now, I'm going to take a good hard look at where where we end up as far as the revenues go and that sort of thing. The concern by folks, whether or not to make this permanent, is we don't necessarily want to paint ourselves in the corner, but on the other hand, if we have adequate revenues to support state government, then it's always good to give a little certainty to that. So it'll be an ongoing discussion.
So how about that fight between the grocery sales tax and the overall sales tax reduction? Where does that go?
Well, I don't see that going anywhere this year, since we dealt with it last year and we did go ahead and pass that overall reduction in the rate of sales tax. I don't see that going anywhere this year, but the legislature is always a interesting beast to follow, and if you think you have a firm grasp of it, check back in an hour and things change in a real big hurry around the legislature. So that's remained to be seen, but I think the main discussion will be on whether or not to leave the sunset in place or make it permanent.
Mike, where do you see the sales tax debate going?
Well, I think the principles that we look at are really important, because if you look at just eliminating the sales tax on groceries permanently, we know what the fiscal impact will be. But when you look at all the other demands, there's a lot of demands for the state revenues, and so how do you balance those demands in the best way? And for example, the counties would like to see the alcohol tax reallocated from 25% to the county, 25% to the city, and 50% to the state, to move it to the county getting 50% because they incur most of the costs related to alcohol abuse. and then reduce that 25% to the state, and then the city would still remain the same at 25%. So, and that makes, those things make sense standing alone, but we have to put them all together and determine what the overall outcome would be, because we can't do everything for everybody in 1 year.
Now,
and the one thing I would like to add on the grocery tax, we've got a lot of very small towns in South Dakota, and in some cases, if they have a city sales tax, the majority contributor of that city sales tax is going to be from the local grocery store in that town. So that's a real concern when we considered it last year also. And in South Dakota, we've got a tremendously broad base that we put the sales tax on, and that has a tendency to allow that burden to be spread around to a lot of people. So I think that we won't see a lot of discussion on that, but I'm sure it certainly could come up.
There are a lot of ideas out there.
Yeah.
Ideas for one of them I heard recently was have the sales tax be at a higher level during tourist season, essentially, 6 months of the year, 5-6 months of the year, which would increase the amount of revenue paid by out-of-state visitors and decrease the amount during the off time for South Dakota residents. So that's just one of half a dozen or more concepts out there to address that issue. But when you get to the grocery sales tax, that's the one that it's more of an emotional, because you think about everybody has to buy groceries, and regardless of their income level, and so the impact is disparate on different levels of income.
Now, talking about taxes, one of the things that I hear most often is people's concern about property taxes. I had a viewer call the other day saying, we were talking about this show, said, asking about property taxes, something's got to be done about those as they keep growing and growing. What can the legislature do about that? Can the legislature do anything about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, how do you replace that revenue to the city, the county, and how do they function without that revenue? And what is the cost to the state? And so it's a huge cost to the state, and I know people are hurt from it. So what we really have are more proposals on how to reduce, or how to keep them from growing, or how to replace them, or with reallocations from other monies. I don't see a property tax elimination passing or even being economically feasible.
Being involved my wife and I had been in business in Central Meade County for 50 years, but we've been in the ranching business for all of that time. And as a percentage of the income that you derive, the property tax gets to be a significant amount of the cost of doing business. But having said that, I always equate the revenue for the state of South Dakota as a water glass. And the water glass has to be full to be able to meet the needs the state is expected to take care of. So if you take that water glass and dump some out to give property tax relief, somehow that has to be replaced, and somebody is going to have to pick up that burden. So I certainly pay a significant amount of property tax, and if there were some method that was fair and equitable, I'm all for it. But the main thing is that you want to be careful that you don't shift that burden to someone else, or even shift it to yourself through a different means. So it's a complex matter.
Now, there is a push to get abortion rights on the ballot here in South Dakota. Do you see the legislature doing anything with that, ahead of that?
I'm going to be bringing a resolution on that, and just and opposing that current proposal that they've got. I think that current proposal is as extreme as there is of any ideas even across the United States. So there's going to be several different things brought up when it comes to exceptions and different things like that. And I think if you consider yourself pro-life, I think that the main thing we've got to focus on is not allowing that to come forward.
Now, what is the issue with that?
Well, right now, the way that is written, it allows for abortion through almost to the time of birth. And that is absolutely not acceptable, along with a lot of other things, but that's probably the most glaring thing that I see.
Now, are those for any condition, or is that for the life of the mother, the life of the baby, the life of...
The way I read it, it is across the board,
Yeah,
for any reason, and I guess I would stand to be corrected, but there's no way that I can support something like that.
It's an initiated measure, so they've drafted it to get everything, whoever the drafters were, to get everything that they wanted to get in there, being very broad, which is often not a good thing when you're doing initiated measures, because things can be either too little or too much, and they don't have as high a chance of passing if they were common sense or reasonable. I think it's probably uniformly agreed that this initiated measure goes as far as as far as the proponents can possibly make it go. So.
And the other thing is that this is a initiated measure to change the Constitution, and so if by chance something like that would pass, and we find a unintended consequence, there is no possible way of making any kind of even small changes. The legislature cannot do that. The only way it can go forward is in the next election, then it has to be voted out. So to correct any glaring unintended consequence, you're just out of luck.
All right, that gets on the ballot. I'm sure we'll be debating that on this program as we get closer to that. We got to take a quick break. We'll continue our look at the 2024 legislative session when we continue with this month's edition of Focus. I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the South Dakota legislative session, which gets started on Tuesday. Representative Gary Cammack from District 29, Union Center, Meade County. He is a majority whip. Gary, there's a resolution out there talking about ballot measures that would put work requirements on some recipients of Medicaid. Where is that going to go in Pierre, and is that a good idea in your opinion?
And again, when my experience over the dozen years that I've been in the legislature, the devil is always in the details, and the biggest thing to fear in any proposal is going to be the unintended consequences. And so, as it stands right now, I'm going to be leaning towards supporting that, but it's going to be a lot of things brought up in the discussion, and things that brought up that are unintended consequences that people might not have even thought about right now. And so that's why, for me, the committee system that we've got, there's not one bill that comes that's proposed by a legislature that doesn't get a hearing. It just happens unless they withdraw it themselves. So it's a really open process, and it's really important process. The committee system allows a lot of any citizen can come in and testify at those committees, and a lot of times it'll bring up things that somebody else, the drafters or the legislators, had not thought about. And so during that time, it's going to be important that we go through all those details. But the number of times that I've had my opinion of a bill or the direction I'm going to move, the number of times I've had my mind changed on the floor, just almost never. In committee, I can't tell you how many times I've had my mind changed because of some new information that comes in that's really important. So that committee process just couldn't be any more important. And
Senator Mike Diedrich of Rapid City, where do you see that Medicaid proposal going?
Well, it's like Representative Cammack said, the devil's in the details, and so really it boils down to requiring able-bodied applicants to be employed. And so then how do we define able-bodied will be an important factor that will come out in the details. And then how does that impact perhaps behavioral health or some kind of a disability that's not visible? It's not necessarily a physical one, or some challenges like that. So it'll be real interesting. And so when as in the leadership, our experience in the leadership, we'll have members come to us to talk about their bills, and if a lot of them will get to the point where let's talk about it. And one of the things that we do, or I do, and you probably do too, is do the questions. What's the pro, what's the con? And sometimes when you're poking at the cons, what's wrong with it? How would you respond to this question? You have members who start feeling like you're opposing their bill, but really we're just helping them understand the context and the questions that will come up when they come into the committee process so they can do the best that they possibly can.
Governor Noem last month laid out her $7.3 billion proposed budget. How much do you see that changing as we go through the session?
Well, I think there'll be a lot of it is I think we have general consensus with the legislative bodies. That's kind of dangerous to say that at this point of the session, before the session starts. But there's a lot, probably $100 million that may be available for additional expenditures, and there's probably at this point $180 to $200 million worth of wants. And so the job is to determine what the difference, as we look at the appropriations process, what are the needs of South Dakota? What do we need to do as opposed to what do we want to do? There's a lot of great things that a lot of different ideas come up that we'd like to do or different parties would like to do. But the bottom line is what do we need to do and how do we fund that?
How do you see this budget changing as it rolls through?
And it's been said a lot of times, but the governor's budget is a proposal. Mm-hmm. The end result is the proposal, and so we're going to be taking a hard look at that. I would agree with Senator Diedrich that I would say we're in agreement on a majority of the things, and there's going to be some things that come up, and the main thing that's going to happen is not being opposed to a given proposal, but weighing the different competing for that money. So which is going to be the best outcome for the state of South Dakota. And
talking about budgets, the fight for education funding is always a battle every year in Pierre. Governor Noem said that was one of her priorities, to increase education funding, get teacher salaries up. Say that every year, but is there enough money to really get that done?
You know, I can't imagine us not coming forward with an increase. Her proposal was 4%. I think that's a reasonable request. But having said that, if you add that up, 4% for all state employees, it's a significant amount of money. And there's never been a year that I've been involved that funding for education hasn't been in the forefront, and you've got to keep working at it. I know that it seems like we're treading water, but if you look at the increases over the last 5 or 6 years, they're significant, but it's just something that we're just as a constant fight, because it's such a monster number that we have to fund education. It just takes a lot of the oxygen out of the room.
So where do we land between what schools want and what there is available to give them?
Right. It's a tough challenge prioritizing. There are some things that we are doing that I believe will get done. We have proposed programs that will allow retired professionals or experts in their field, whether it's a welder or a banker, to be able to come in and teach to the appropriate level of classes, middle school, high school, without the certification. And if they want to get the certification, initially without, but if they want to get certification, that time will be credited towards the requirements to get your certificate done. But what it does is it allows a great body of talent that we have in our communities to come in and work in the school systems without increasing the costs and improving or adding to the education of our K through 12 students.
All right, we got to take another break. We'll continue our look at the 2024 South Dakota State Legislative Session when we continue with this month's edition of Focus. I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the 2024 South Dakota Legislative Session that gets started on Tuesday. Representative Gary Cammack from District 29. You have a far more rural district than Mike does, a lot of ag land up there. What are some of the ag issues that you see going to be prominent in Pierre this year?
There's a perennial discussion about about property tax. In fact, we've got a standing committee that considers the way that ag land is taxed in the state of South Dakota. It changed over several years ago to take into consideration productivity of the land. It took a lot to get it there, and it seems like it is working. If you ask an individual that's involved in agriculture, I'm sure that they're going to say that as a percentage of their bottom line, the property tax is too big of a number. But again, you've got to figure out how we can, if we are to change that, how we make that equitable so that we don't shift that tax burden onto someone else too. So it's the taxes are always an issue. There's going to be some legislation brought forward as it pertains to the brand board. There'll be some changes proposed to that. I think the Department of Agriculture is bringing a bill that has several things that are incorporated in that to try to make that work a little bit smoother. And so that'll be some discussion along those lines to make that whole system work smoothly for everyone.
Senator Mike Diedrich from District 34 here in Rapid City. Talking earlier about ballot measures as a push to get recreational marijuana on the ballot again here in South Dakota. I can't remember the last time there weren't marijuana bills going through the legislature. We're going to see changes there this year?
We will. We already know there will be bills filed to affect the law as it currently stands, the impact of the law and different issues that are related to it as perceived by different legislators or interested groups or stakeholders. So there will be bills related to that. There is, of course, there's always discussion about the clear approval by the voters for recreational drugs, and so that always comes up as well. I still think that would take an initiated measure to make that happen. And the difference would be that the measure would stand on its own instead of being connected to medical marijuana. And those who are observers of the process say the fact that recreational and medical were somewhat blended or confused. The voters in the last time around did approve the recreational only by 3.6%, I believe it was. And not sure that that would happen on a future ballot where it stood alone without the potential to get it confused with what some people consider to be the benefits of medical marijuana.
During the break, you were talking about long-term care. You said that will be something significant.
Long-term care is an important issue in South Dakota. We have our nursing homes, assisted living homes throughout the state are slowly closing down. We've had either 9 or 11 in the last 4 or 5 years that have closed down primarily because of workforce and staff, lack of staff for that. And then the reimbursement rate for providing those services to those who are under the Medicaid program is low. And so the combination of low resources and a low workforce has caused those homes to eliminate or close down. The long-term care summer study committee had multiple working groups. And really what they're looking at is how do we consolidate so that we consolidate resources and put them in locations. Where do we put them in locations where workforce will come and remain? We need to look at the way we determine the reimbursement, and there's a cost, an incentive potential out there that if owners invest in it, it'll help impact the cost so they get reimbursed at a little higher level because they've made that investment. There's just a lot of issues related to that and it impacts everybody in South Dakota.
We've got about 30 seconds to go. How big of an issue is the long-term care facilities in those rural areas? Is it worse there?
Eventually, it affects everyone. But in the rural areas, the problem that you got when you have a long-term care facility closed down, a lot of times you're having to move mom and dad or grandma and grandpa 50 or 60 miles away from where they're currently residing, and so the opportunities for that family to visit gets to be limited, and that makes it kind of a sad situation also.
All right, we are completely out of time. Senator Mike Diedrich, Representative Gary Cammack, thank you guys for coming up. Thank you for joining us, and hope you see you again the first Sunday night of next month for another edition of Focus. Good night.